There are doors you walk through, doors that close in your face, and doors no one ever built for you. Amira Khan knew all three. She once stood in front of a boutique door in downtown Manhattan, holding her resume and a hopeful smile, only to be told softly, sweetly, that someone like her should try somewhere else. This is not the story of that moment. This is the story of what happened next. It was supposed to be just another Tuesday. The streets of Lower Manhattan pulsed with the quiet urgency of ambition. Office workers clutched their coffees like lifelines. Food couriers wove between taxis, and a crisp wind swept fallen leaves into chaotic spirals. Amid all this movement, one figure stood still. Amira Khan, 27, waited on the sidewalk across from the Bellamont flagship store. Her coat, a beige trench with frayed cuffs, did little to stop the chill, but she stood with her shoulders squared and chin high. In her hands, she held a soft leather folder containing 4 carefully printed copies of her resume. She had checked each one the night before, smoothing the pages until they were flawless. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. She had done her homework, read every article, watched every press release, memorized the brand's history. Bellamont was not just a luxury store, it was a statement. Their latest campaigns claimed to champion diversity, authenticity, and the future of luxury. The assistant stylist role wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. She had the skills, the training, the passion. What she didn't have was the right shoes. She stepped through the glass doors into a world that immediately made her feel underdressed. The interior was cathedral-like, marble floors that clicked under heels, floor-to-ceiling mirrors trimmed in gold, and glass display cases that held handbags like precious stones. Scented air, vanilla and white rose, wrapped itself around her. Everything gleamed. At the center counter stood 3 employees, 2 young women and 1 man, all in sleek black suits that probably cost more than her monthly rent. They were laughing about something, but their smiles faded as she entered. The man raised a brow. The taller blonde woman, her name tag read Whitney, tilted her head with a kind of amused curiosity. Amira smiled politely and approached. "Hi, good morning," she began. "I'm here to drop off my resume for the assistant stylist position. I received an email saying I could bring it in." Whitney cut her off before the sentence finished. "Oh, right. That." She didn't take the folder. "I'm sorry, but we don't accept paper applications anymore. Everything's digital now." Amira's smile faltered. "I understand, but the email I received said—" Whitney leaned forward slightly, her voice still sweet. "We just changed our policy, as of yesterday." The other associate, a brunette named Talia, chuckled softly. "I see," Amira said, trying to hold her ground. "Would it be possible to leave this for the hiring manager anyway? I've worked with textiles and inventory management." Whitney's smile tightened. "Sweetheart," she said in a voice that sent heat to Amira's face, "this is a very competitive store. You should probably try somewhere more your speed. Maybe Zarra's hiring?" Amira blinked. There it was. The moment when professionalism gave way to condescension. When someone looked at you and decided what kind of job you deserved, not based on your qualifications, but on the shape of your eyebrows, the way your scarf was tied, or the fact that your coat had no designer label. "I just thought I'd take a chance," Amira said quietly. Whitney gave a thin smile. "Sometimes it's better to know your lane." The folder in her hands felt heavier now, but she didn't drop it. She turned, walked out, and let the doors shut softly behind her. The moment she stepped outside, she felt the burn in her throat. Not anger, not yet, just disbelief. She didn't go straight home. Instead, she walked 6 blocks north until the boutiques gave way to cafes and secondhand bookstores. She found a quiet bench beneath a rust-colored tree and sat down. Around her, the world went on. Couples sipped cappuccinos, delivery bikes rushed past, and tourists snapped photos of murals they didn't understand. But Amira sat still, her eyes fixed on the folder in her lap. She had been here before. Not this bench, not this street, but this feeling. 3 years ago, she had graduated with honors from a design program known for its rigor. She had held internships, mentored younger students, even presented at a textile sustainability conference in Chicago. But the second they saw her name, Khan, The questions always shifted. Where are you from? No, but where are you really from? Her work was always met with surprise, as if talent was unexpected in someone like her. She pulled out her phone, opened her inbox, and reread the confirmation email from Bellamont HR. It was real. She hadn't imagined it. Please bring a physical copy of your resume for in-person consideration. She had followed the rules, and still she had been shut out before even being heard. Just as she was about to close the email in frustration, a new notification appeared. LinkedIn. A message. Jonathan Ellis, Global Director, Bellamont. Hi, Amira. I came across your sustainability research through Pratt's archive. Really compelling work. I'd love to connect. Bellamont is expanding globally, and we're building a new advisory team. Interested in chatting? She read the message 3 times. Her fingers hovered above the screen. A different division, a different tone, an entirely different door. She hit reply. Thank you for reaching out. I'd be happy to connect. And for the first time that day, she smiled, because even though Whitney had dismissed her, someone else had seen the value she carried. And this time, they had found her first. The next day, Amira sat at her tiny kitchen table, the morning sun bleeding through the curtain with a pale yellow glow. Her laptop buzzed softly beside her as she spooned oatmeal into a bowl. Her brother Kareem shuffled into the kitchen, still half asleep. You're up early, he muttered. Didn't sleep much, as she replied. Kareem poured himself some cereal and leaned on the counter. You sent your stuff to that place? She nodded. Got a message back from one of their directors. Different department. He raised his eyebrows. Wait, after they dissed you like that? Amira sighed. It wasn't him. He probably doesn't even know. Well, are you going to tell him? What would that even do? Whitney would just deny it, say I misunderstood, and I'd come off looking bitter. Kareem shrugged. Sometimes it's not about proving people wrong. Sometimes it's just about walking through the other door. She didn't answer, but the words sat with her. By noon, she had showered, changed, and was reviewing her research portfolio, preparing to meet Jonathan Ellis via Zoom. He joined 2 minutes early. Jonathan was in his 40s, African-American, calm voice, sharp blazer. He thanked her for making the time. I know this might be unexpected, he began, but I've been reviewing young textile voices globally, and your work stood out. Amira nodded slowly. I appreciate that. We're looking at launching a community innovation board, a think tank of sorts, young designers, consultants, sustainability researchers. Paid, of course. He smiled. Her breath caught slightly. Paid. That word meant rent, groceries, breathing room. He continued. It's early stage, but I'd love to fly you out to LA in 2 weeks. We're holding our first roundtable. Low pressure, just ideas. Amira stared at the screen, processing. Of course, she said finally. I'm in. After they ended the call, she sat in silence for several minutes. That boutique, that moment of dismissal, suddenly it felt far away. Not gone, not erased, but smaller. She had been seen now, not just looked at, and in 2 weeks, she'd be walking into a different kind of room. One where her words, not her shoes, would be what mattered. Part 2. 2 weeks later, Amira stood in the middle of LAX's arrivals hall, clutching the handle of her suitcase like it was the last stable thing in her life. The invitation had been real. The plane ticket had arrived 2 days ago. A courier even delivered a sleek folder with Bellamont branding, her name etched in gold on the inside cover. It contained the itinerary, the agenda, and a handwritten note from Jonathan Ellis himself. Looking forward to hearing your ideas. Let the room meet you. That phrase stuck with her. Let the room meet you. Not let them judge you. Not try to impress. Just show up. Still, as she stepped into the SUV Bellamont had sent to pick her up, she couldn't shake the memory of Whitney's face, of the moment she was treated like someone not worth hearing. Now she was headed to a leadership retreat at the Bellamont Pacific Villa, an oceanfront estate in Malibu reserved for strategy sessions and elite gatherings. When she arrived, a valet took her bag. The house was unreal. Every surface was glass or stone. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened to a view of the Pacific that seemed to pulse with sunlight. Staff moved in silence, setting out platters of fruit and lemon water. A woman with braids and a clipboard greeted her. "Ms. Khan, welcome. You'll be in room 4. We'll begin in the Azure Lounge in an hour." Amira followed her down a hallway lined with abstract art and heavy oak doors. Her room was a minimalist dream. Linen sheets, a private balcony, and a note that simply read, "Rest is productive too." She changed quickly, pulled her hair back, and headed to the lounge. There were 14 other attendees, designers, consultants, researchers, all under 35. A few had massive online followings. One woman had just done a TED Talk. Another had designed for Milan Fashion Week. Amira felt the tightness creep into her chest again. "Let the room meet you." She found a seat near the back and took out her notebook. Then Jonathan entered. He didn't speak right away. He just walked to the center of the room, looked at each person in turn and said, "Welcome. You're here because someone on my team said, 'This voice matters.' You don't need to prove anything. Just participate." There was a collective exhale in the room. Then one by one, people began to introduce themselves. When it was Amira's turn, she stood. "My name is Amira Khan. I studied textile design and sustainability. I work with underfunded communities and teach part-time. And 2 weeks ago, I was told in a boutique that I should apply somewhere more my speed." Several people turned toward her. A beat of silence passed. Then one woman said, "Well, their loss." And someone else added, "You're exactly where you belong." Amira sat down, heart racing. But something had shifted. She had said it, out loud, and the sky didn't fall. Over the next 2 days, the sessions were intense. Not corporate, not stuffy. Real conversations about representation, waste, customer psychology, fast fashion ethics. Amira spoke twice in the first day, then 5 times the next. On the final evening, Jonathan pulled her aside. "Do you know how I first found you?" She shook her head. "I was reviewing grant applications. Your name came up. I read your textile waste proposal. Then I saw your photo. I sent it to someone in our New York City team. Do you know what she said?" Amira's stomach dropped. "What?" He smiled faintly. "She said, 'She won't be a culture fit. Our clients expect polish.'" He paused. "So I flew to New York. I watched what happened at the boutique. You didn't see me, but I saw everything." Her mouth went dry. "You saw?" "Yes," he said. "And you stayed calm, professional, even kind. That told me more than any portfolio could." She blinked fast, trying to process. "I'm sorry that happened to you," he added, "but I'm not sorry I saw it, because it made it very easy to decide who I wanted in this room." She felt something in her chest let go. That night, she watched the sun drop into the Pacific and thought, maybe this is what it feels like to reclaim the narrative. After dinner on the second night, several of the fellows gathered on the balcony with drinks and fleece throws wrapped around their shoulders. Someone connected a phone to a Bluetooth speaker, and soft jazz filled the background. The moonlight hit the ocean just right, and for a few minutes nobody spoke. Amira sat with a cup of mint tea, her notebook open on her lap. Though she wasn't writing, she was listening to the way these people, her peers now, talked about building systems instead of just products. They weren't pitching. They were imagining, collaborating, respecting each other's lived experiences. A tall man named Marcellus, who worked in indigenous dye research, asked her, "So what's your dream?" Amira blinked. "Like, ultimate dream?" He nodded. She hesitated, then, "A studio. Not just to create, but to mentor. A place where girls like I was, quiet, brown, working class, can come and learn to see design as more than fantasy, as a way to speak." Marcellus grinned. "Sounds like the world needs it." Later that night, she opened her laptop and drafted a 2-page outline. Working title, The Tana Studio Project. The next morning was the final session, an informal feedback circle. Each participant was asked to name one idea that stuck with them and one person who inspired them. Amira wasn't ready for what happened next. One by one, her name came up. I didn't know how textile waste intersected with social equity until Amira broke it down. Her comment about dignity and design changed how I think about customer experience. She's why I'm rethinking how I mentor interns. When it was her turn, she barely found the words. I came here thinking I'd be invisible, she said softly, but I've never felt more seen. Jonathan closed the session by saying, don't forget what happens when you create space. You don't just fill a room, you let it breathe. After the final group photo on the cliffside, Amira stayed back. Jonathan approached her once more. How would you feel, he asked, about joining Bellamont full-time, not as a stylist, but as our director of ethical innovation? She froze. I know it's a lot, but the work you've done in 3 days has shifted how we frame this entire initiative. I want you in the room where decisions get made. Tears sprang to her eyes before she could stop them. I need time, she whispered. You've earned that, he said. But whatever you decide, know this. Your voice started something. Amira walked back to her room slowly, her steps sinking softly into the gravel. The sky was pink with morning, the air warm. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her mom. I saw your photo on the Bellamont website. You're glowing. We're proud. She smiled through tears. She had walked into that room afraid of being overlooked again. Instead, she had been rewritten into the story. Later that week, back in New York, Amira returned to her regular rhythm, subway rides, freelance shifts, checking her teaching emails. But something was different. She felt steadier, more rooted. One evening, she was invited to speak at a local design collective's panel on breaking into fashion without losing yourself. The room was modest, folding chairs, string lights, mismatched mugs of tea, but it was full. As she spoke about her experience at Bellamont, she saw heads nodding. One student raised her hand with tears in her eyes and said, I thought I had to change everything about myself to belong. Amira smiled. I used to think that too. But here's the truth. The right rooms don't just accept you. They shift to make space. The crowd applauded. Afterward, a woman approached with a resume in hand. I was told to apply somewhere more realistic too, she said softly. Amira took the paper. Well, now you know that advice is worth exactly $0. They both laughed. A week later, Amira received an email from Bellamont's executive assistant. Subject line, offer letter, confidential. She read every word carefully. Director of Ethical Innovation, remote option, health benefits, travel stipend, full creative control of a team of 3, salary more than double anything she had made in her entire adult life. She didn't cry until she called her mother. You did this, her mother whispered in Urdu. You walked into that storm and came back with the sky. And for once, Amira let herself believe it. The next morning, Amira walked past the same Bellamont boutique where she had once been turned away. She didn't pause, didn't glare, didn't walk faster or slower. But she noticed something. A new sign was posted inside the window. We're hiring, we're listening, we're evolving. The font was elegant, the message subtle. But she knew. She wasn't just entering rooms now. She was redesigning them. And maybe the next woman who looked like her, walked like her, spoke like her, would walk through those same doors and be met with curiosity instead of judgment. Maybe she'd be greeted with, we've been expecting you. Part 3. 3 months had passed since Amira accepted the position at Bellamont. The first few weeks were a whirlwind. Video meetings with regional managers, tours of flagship stores, policy reviews, and sleepless nights sketching ideas on napkins and voice-memoing thoughts while brushing her teeth. For the first time in her life, her calendar was booked weeks ahead. People waited to hear her speak. Her input was required, and yet something sat heavy in her chest. She'd gotten the title, the salary, the respect, but she hadn't yet made the one thing that mattered most: impact. She kept thinking of the girl she used to be, the one who'd hesitated outside luxury doors, unsure if she belonged. She thought of the other resumes, the ones tossed aside for sounding too ethnic or for listing schools that weren't Ivy League. The applicants who never got called back because they weren't brand compatible. Now that she had a seat at the table, what was she going to do with it? It started small. She pitched a policy that ensured every regional hiring team had at least one member trained in unconscious bias detection. Then she restructured the onboarding program to include mandatory cultural sensitivity workshops, delivered not through dry HR modules, but through lived experience panels and anonymized testimonials from past employees. But that wasn't enough. She remembered how it felt to be dismissed without being seen. So she designed a new initiative, the Mirror Project, a series of short films featuring stories, real ones, of people who had experienced quiet exclusion inside high-end retail spaces. No shouting, no call-outs, just truth. One voice at a time. Her team protested at first. Too raw, too risky, too political, but she held firm. The only thing riskier than sharing the truth, she told them, is pretending it doesn't exist. The board hesitated. Jonathan backed her. And when the campaign launched, it went viral. 2 weeks later, a customer emailed Bellamont after watching the third Mirror episode. I cried in my car after watching this. I used to avoid your stores because I didn't feel welcome. Now I feel like someone finally gets it. Another email read, please tell Amira Khan she changed how I trained my entire retail staff. And then, a handwritten letter mailed to corporate. I'm a 72-year-old black woman from Baltimore. Last month, I walked into your DC store for the first time in a decade. A young employee greeted me with warmth, offered me tea, and listened as I explained I wasn't buying, just browsing. No one rushed me. No one judged. I walked out empty-handed but full-hearted. I think that's what luxury should feel like. Amira held the letter in her hands for 10 minutes before speaking. She called a meeting the next morning. What if we stop designing experiences based on who we think people want to be, she said, and started designing based on who they actually are? No one argued, because everyone in the room knew this wasn't a campaign anymore. It was a shift. Weeks turned into months. Amira traveled to 11 cities, visiting stores, meeting teams, and holding quiet one-on-ones with entry-level staff. She didn't enter with clipboards or checklists. She entered with questions. What do you wish someone had asked you when you were hired? What's the moment you felt invisible at work? She took notes, pages and pages. She brought them back to headquarters and read them aloud during quarterly meetings. One story haunted her. A clerk in Chicago had once escorted a woman to the door because she looked out of place, only to discover she was an architect who had helped design their Tokyo showroom. When Amira told that story, the room fell into silence. We've been chasing aspirational, she said, and ignoring actual. Bellamont shifted. The next product campaign didn't feature supermodels or stage homes. It featured teachers, grandmothers, freelancers in small apartments. Real lives, real luxury, the tagline read. The boardroom braced for backlash. Instead, revenue rose 12% in Q1. Customers felt seen. Employees felt proud. And Amira? She felt steady, but not finished. In spring, she returned to the boutique in Soho, the same one where Whitney had dismissed her that day. The place where it had all started. It had been renovated, subtle changes, warmer lighting, lower counters, softer seating, more mirrors at customer height. Whitney was no longer there. She had transferred shortly after the Mirror Project launched. Officially, it was her decision. Unofficially, word had traveled. Amira didn't ask for details. She didn't need them. She walked in and was greeted by a young associate named Mila, who offered her a quiet smile and said, "Welcome in. Let me know how I can help." Amira looked around. She wasn't shopping. She wasn't checking. She was remembering. Then she handed Mila a handwritten note. "For whoever interviews your next hire," it read, "please look beyond the shoes." At year's end, Amira stood on a stage in front of 3,000 people at an international design summit. She wore navy, no jewelry, no slides, just her voice. "I was told once to try somewhere more my speed," she began. "I did, and it turned out my speed was innovation." The audience laughed gently, then grew still. You don't have to be loud to be heard. You don't have to be rich to be relevant. You don't need permission to belong. You belong because you're here. She closed her speech with one sentence. Change doesn't happen when we demand a seat at the table. It happens when we ask, who's missing from this room and why? Standing ovation. Backstage, she sat quietly in the green room, letting the applause fade from her ears. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jonathan. It started with a resume no one read. Look what you've built. She closed her eyes. It was never just about one job, one store, one rejection. It was about rewriting the blueprint. Not just for herself, but for everyone who'd ever been told not quite right. And in that moment, Amira Khan finally knew. She hadn't walked through the door. She had remade it. 2 weeks later, Amira returned to Pratt Institute. She had been invited as a guest speaker, not in the auditorium, but in a small classroom where students sat cross-legged on the floor, notebooks in their laps, eyes wide and ready. The walls were lined with woven samples, color wheels, and pinned-up sketches. The same room she'd once sat in, silently wondering if she'd ever matter. Now she stood before them, not as someone who made it out, but someone who reached back. Your ideas are enough, she said. You don't need to dress them up in someone else's brand voice. Speak your own. One student raised her hand. But what if no one listens? Amira smiled. Then speak anyway, because someone like you will hear it, and that's how we survive. Later, a professor handed her a thank you card signed by the class. Inside was one line. You proved it's possible. That night, she sat at her desk with the city glowing behind her. The Mirror Project had been nominated for 3 industry awards. Bellamont was now partnering with small textile cooperatives to source ethically. Her studio fund proposal had been greenlit by the board. Still, she opened her inbox and returned to the very first message she had ever received from Jonathan. Let the room meet you, she typed a reply, even though she knew he might never expect one. They did, and now I'm building new ones. She hit send. Then she opened a new document, and she started again, this time on her own terms. Epilogue. A month later, Amira appeared on the cover of Visionaire, a leading fashion ethics journal. The title read, The Architect of Belonging, How Amira Khan Redefined Luxury. Inside, the interview was raw and generous. I didn't change the system, she said. I reminded it that people like me were always here. They just weren't being heard. The article was shared over 200,000 times in the first week. Industry leaders quoted her lines on panels. Bellamont began offering a yearly grant in her name, the Amira Fund, to support designers from marginalized communities building purpose-driven brands. One evening, as Amira scrolled through tagged photos, she came across a video. A teenage girl stood in front of a mirror in a Bellamont fitting room, holding a dress up to her chest. I didn't think this place was for me, but now it is. Her voice cracked, and she whispered, Thank you, Amira. Amira stared at the screen. She didn't share it, didn't repost. She just sat with it, because that was the point, not to be known, but to make space so others could be. And that was everything.